Hi, welcome to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. In the last video, we talked about the second step to interpreting parables, and that is to simply understand the physical language Jesus is using in his earthly story, just on a superficial level. But I mentioned that in order to do that, sometimes it's going to take a little work. It's going to take a little research on our part because the language Jesus uses in the parables is often language that would resonate with the people in the first century world. And since we're removed from that culture, it's going to take us a little effort, a little research in order to understand the language Jesus is using so that we can understand that second step to interpreting parables and understanding just the simple physical story Jesus is telling. But when I said that, you may have been wondering, well, what kind of research are you talking about, Brian? How does this work? And that leads me to make a brief note here about commentaries. Okay, a commentary is basically a book written by a person. Okay, like for instance, this is a commentary on First Corinthians written by Gareth Reese. And what it is he just takes you through First Corinthians and verse by verse he analyzes the text and he gives you his take on the interpretation of the text. And really all those books behind me are all commentaries by different authors on different books of the Bible. Now, a couple very important things to note about commentaries. First of all, they're written by people, okay, and men or women, okay, they're infallible. Or excuse me, they're not infallible. They are not infallible. God is the only one infallible. The Bible is the only thing infallible. So when you read a commentary, just because somebody says something does not mean that it's right. Okay, so be careful with commentaries. Second of all, there are two aspects of commentaries. One is the objective nature of commentaries, and the other is the subjective nature of commentaries. When I say objective, I mean the very factual, absolute matter of fact. We know these things from history. Nobody denies it. They're across the board understood. Those are the objective sections of commentaries. The subjective sections are where the commentator actually gives his educated opinion about the meaning of a text. And you can tell the difference usually between the sections because the objective sections will use factual language like, we know from history that, fill in the blank. But the subjectives will usually say, it seems best to interpret this passage this way, or this writer interprets Jesus' saying to mean this, or Paul's passage of verses to mean X, Y, and Z. Okay, so you can kind of tell the difference between the two. One of them is the opinion of the commentator. The other, the objective section, is just accepted history. Everybody knows, nobody really disagrees with it. And so when I say to do research on the language of the parables, I mean that you need to look for the objective meaning of the language Jesus uses. So for instance, in the parable of the two debtors in Luke 7 verse 41, I might grab a commentary on the book of Luke and turn to chapter 7 and verse 41, and the commentator may say, in history, a denarius is a day's wage. And they may also give me very interesting facts about denarius and denarii that I just didn't know before, but everybody knows and agrees on in history. That's really a good way to understand the language Jesus is talking about. Same thing when Jesus talks about farming and he uses language of agriculture. Well, what is a mustard seed? What is a mustard tree? What wedding custom is Jesus referring to? Often a good commentary will give you those objective facts. And the truth is, it's not always black and white. So sometimes a commentator will say things like, well, we're not 100% sure of this custom that Jesus is talking about, but it's generally accepted that in X, Y, and Z. And so not everything is black and white, but it does help you get a good picture of the language Jesus is using. And that's why commentaries are valuable. You could also look things up in Google. If you typed up denarius in Google, well, you can find good objective answers online as well. You've got to, of course, be careful what you read. You always have to be careful what you read. But there are objective historical sources that can help us in understanding the physical language that Jesus uses. I sure hope that that's helpful, and thank you so much for your interest in spiritual things. Lord willing, I'll see you next time.